Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past and life's just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone. Taste the wind, don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love, let the music get you high. And when it's said and done, you'll know.
I grew up on our farm in Illinois, 100 miles west of Chicago. I went to a one-room country school, one teacher for grades 1 through 6. And when I was in first grade, at least one time I sat next to sixth grader Roger Malataka to share a music book. Not enough books for everyone to have one. And I felt a special attraction to tall, dark Italian Roger in this mostly white community. I did not fantasize about sex with Roger. I did not know about those wonderful pleasures, male with male. But I felt a special, cozy, at-home magnetism for him. I don't know if Roger, as he grew older, was gay or bisexual or straight. He moved away, and sadly, I do not know if Roger is dead or alive. When I was 12, teenager David worked shirt-free on our farm. I was very attracted to him. And once, when I was maybe 14, my mother came into our bathroom and caught me masturbating. She insisted that I promise not to masturbate. And after that, I felt terribly torn between not wanting to break my promise and wanting to keep enjoying my cock and coming. So I started masturbating in a different way. In high school, when certain male athletes came into the study hall, the invisible spotlight of my attention focused on them. I wanted them, I needed them, but they apparently did not feel the same toward me. 2 male-female couples in my class got pregnant before graduation. I'm glad I did not have a child to parent, but I envied them for having sex. No teacher in high school, no teacher in college told me many well-known men, past and present, were gay or bisexual, enjoying sex and romance with men. Michelangelo, Walt Whitman, Leonardo da Vinci, Baird Rustin, Langston Hughes, multitudes more. If you're black or brown, how would you feel if your teachers never spoke about well-known black and brown people, but only about white people? If you're a woman, how would you feel if your teachers never spoke about well-known women, past or present, only about men? After I became a sincere young Christian preacher at age 20, I became friends with many teenage Chicano guys in that town. And some told me of girls they liked and dated. I envied them for having sex with girls. I never had, even though I was older than they were. I had no openly gay or bisexual friends. I knew several Bible verses condemned sex between men, but the same Bible, sadly, in hundreds of verses, supported men killing men in war. I did not know that millions of men, past and present, have been in love with men and made love with men in passionate romance. I found out years later, even David and Jonathan in the Bible were in love with each other. Later, in my 20s, when I was no longer a pastor, I told my mother I wanted to have sex with someone. I assumed it would be with a woman. But who? I had never seriously dated a woman. Later, when I drove from Albuquerque to Juarez, Mexico, I had sex with a woman sex worker there. First time in my life with another human being. But I came before I would have entered her. I had looked forward to this as I drove my car down to Juarez. I was so eager. I had waited so long, waited for years to have sex with another human being. But how sad that in my 20s, I felt I had to go to another nation and pay a pimp to have sex with a woman stranger. A woman stranger I was not attracted to. My Spanish was not good. Her English was not good. And it was far from a romantic connection for both of us. Later, I had sex with a few more women, 2 in Albuquerque, 1 young woman in Illinois, in the town where I had been pastor years before. And one night at the Latin American Social Club, I danced with her. She said she might not live long. She wanted sex with me. I knew she was living with a man, so I asked her, what about him? In other words, is it okay with him if I have sex with you? She said they were liberated, free to have sex with other people. And I went off the dance floor, and I told my dear friend Johnny about the situation for his advice. He said he thought she was lonely, and whatever happens, happens. I went to her place after the dance. Her boyfriend was not home. She and I had sex. And after sex, while I was still lying naked in their bed, she kept going to the window, watching for her boyfriend to come home. And when he came, she went after him. Where had he been? Doing what? With whom? I was still lying naked in their bed. He came into the bedroom, saw me, was probably kind of shocked to see me there. He knew of me, but I pretended to be asleep. I'm glad he did not attack me. They kept arguing, going after each other. And finally, I don't know how long it took, they both went to sleep in other rooms. And as the dawn came, the light in the east came, I put on my clothes and left that house a wiser man. I learned that some people who say they are sexually liberated are not sexually liberated, still hung up on jealousy, trying to cage the other person. Do not be conned as I was. Actually, I was sexually attracted to two of her brothers, but I never had sex with them. For many years, while my parents were still living, I lived part-time there in Illinois, part-time here in Albuquerque. In late 1976, my friends Steve and Cease here told me they wanted to take me to a place I might like. They took me to a gay bar on Central here in Albuquerque. And never before had I set foot in a gay bar. I met a young man from Cuba, New Mexico. He and I had sex at my place. That was my first time with any male. I was 31 years old. Soon after that, I told my mother, and she said she had never known there were gay people in the world. I had feared losing my straight male friends. I had many. If I came out gay. And some of those friends did back off from me and turned cold. And one of those friends who had turned cold after he found out I was gay, years later apologized to me. And since that first sex with a man almost 45 years ago here in Albuquerque, I had sex with many men, dozens of men, in Albuquerque, Chicago, San Diego, New York City, Madison, Wichita, Peoria, San Antonio, Ohio, and on our Illinois farm. I tasted romance with some men. Bisexual Jose from Mexico. I met him when he was 23 at the Spence Hot Springs at Jemez. He and I had sex over 100 times, more often than with any other man in my life. I deeply loved Jose. Sadly, he got involved with drugs. He was locked up. His green card was taken away. He was sent back to Mexico. Dear Roberto died of AIDS at 31. This wristband he gave me. And on the wristband, I later put these two rings, this one from my friend Joe Chavez, and this one from my friend Martina Tafoya here in Albuquerque. I had sent that ring to my father's mother for Mother's Day 1976. And she wrote me back thanking me. She liked it. And she was wearing it when she and my grandfather were murdered in June 1976. And this wristband my mother bought for my dad here in Albuquerque back in the 1970s. I like jewelry that has a heart connection. Roberto, dear Roberto, who died at 31 from AIDS, I chose my plot at San Jose de Armijo Cemetery here on the west side of Albuquerque. My plot is close to his. My beloved Don died in a car crash at 25. I deeply loved him. His mother had me in charge of his memorial service. Another Don from northern New Mexico, part native, part Filipino. David from Ohio. He was the first man in my life that I wept sucking his toes in a beautiful outdoor nature location at a gay nudist gathering in Ohio. David and I danced together at a Mexican bar 38 years ago in Illinois, and no one attacked us, no one threatened us. I learned that we often hold the keys to our own prisons. Before my mother died in 1982, I often told her about my having sex with men. And once she told me she wished she could be a mouse in the corner. She meant to watch me have sex with a man. I wish it had happened, but sadly, it didn't. I introduced her to Jaime, a young gay Chicano in Houston. He deeply impressed her, but he and I never became lovers. In the 1970s, when I was in Illinois, I wrote to my friend Patty Quintana here in Martineztown, telling her I am gay. And she wrote me back a good letter saying she knew I am gay from the first day she met me years before. And when I was here in Albuquerque, I wrote to my friend Lupio Laldi in Illinois, telling him I'm gay. And he wrote me back a good letter saying he knew I was gay from the first day he met me years before. Often friends of gay or bisexual persons know years before the gay or bisexual persons come out, if they ever do. I would rather be hated, I would rather be rejected by some people for who I am than be loved by them for living a lie. My mother taught me to tell the truth. I treasure my strong sexual and romantic attraction to certain men. Life is too precious to fake. Romance is too precious to hide. If you're just coming out, tell adult friends you know and trust, adult friends who have openly gay friends. And if you're under 18 and your parents are strongly against being gay, you may need to wait until you are at least 18 and can move out before you tell them. A city employee in Espanola with a gambling problem was dismissed after a $40,000 budget shortage was discovered. A Roman Catholic priest in Las Cruces was removed from his parish after it was uncovered that he embezzled thousands of dollars from church coffers to feed his gambling addiction. A grandmother who had no criminal record robbed the Camel Rock Casino at gunpoint because of gambling problems. And then from James Dobson, gambling remains exactly what it always has been, a greed-driven vice that degrades, demoralizes, destroys. Try as they might, advocates cannot beautify this beast, even by changing the name from gambling to gaming. As former Nevada Deputy Attorney General Chuck Gardner has astutely observed, no one in the history of mankind has ever developed or operated a casino out of a burning desire to improve the lot of humanity. Much of the over $50 billion that gambling operators rake in each year comes from the sick, the desperate, the deluded. Even the industry's own studies show a rising tide of gambling addicts, men and women, hooked on this so-called harmless entertainment, that they're destroying their lives and those of their families in horrific ways. Is it worth the Chicago mother on trial on charges of suffocating her 3-week-old daughter to collect a $200,000 insurance payment to finance her casino habit? Is it worth the lives of the 6 elderly individuals robbed and murdered in Gonzales, Louisiana, so that one man could feed his video poker addiction? Is gambling worth the 10-day-old infant in South Carolina who died after being locked in a hot car for 7 hours straight while her mother gambled? Is gambling worth the Louisiana woman who killed her parents and the Kansas City woman who murdered her firefighter husband, both to collect insurance to pay off gambling debts? Is it worth the suicide of the 19-year-old Iowa college student, the retired couple in Illinois, the St. Louis homemaker, and the hundreds of others who have killed themselves because of their gambling problems? Is it worth the increases in domestic violence, child abuse, bankruptcies, homelessness, crime, political corruption that accompanied the expansion of gambling? The Republican Party can no longer maintain the facade as defenders of family values on the one hand, while extending the other hand to take the money and do the bidding of this predatory industry, gambling. Nor, for that matter, can the Democratic Party continue to fashion itself as champion of the poor while also receiving millions from an activity that fleeces those with the fewest financial resources. Wise words from James Dobson. I damn gambling, whether it's run by the mafia or by the state of New Mexico or by white people or by Native American people or by whomever. And worst of all is Wall Street. They told them they had bad blood. What they actually had was syphilis. But the U.S. Public Health Service never shared that diagnosis with the almost 400 African American men, most of them poor, undereducated sharecroppers. They recruited for a secret study at Tuskegee Institute in 1932. Indeed, health officials did little for those men for 40 years, except watch the progression of the disease. Use them as guinea pigs as they suffer. And that was the goal, to see what happens when syphilis is unchecked. They did see syphilis is a venereal disease that can lead to paralysis, blindness, deafness, dementia, heart trouble, brain damage, and death. People often point to the so-called Tuskegee Institute, as the Tuskegee experiment, to explain why African Americans tend to not trust the medical establishment. But while that, what happened in Alabama was evil and obscene, it was not unique. To the contrary, from experimental procedures on the vaginas of enslaved women to grave robbers stealing black bodies for use in medical schools, to forced sterilization in the name of eugenics, to studies revealing white doctors think that black people feel less pain, to new Mother Serena Williams having to battle doctors and nurses who ignored her as she suffered a life-threatening medical emergency. Black people have been routinely, deliberately betrayed by the medical profession, whose prime directive is supposed to be, first, do no harm. So the mistrust that many black people feel toward the medical establishment is grounded in hard experience, abuse, awful abuse. Dear Anlanders, I knew a man who drank for more than 30 years. He was a police officer. And one day, after being on duty from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., having had several drinks instead of lunch, he went out partying. And later, he got in his car to drive home. He stopped at a traffic light, and remember, this is a cop with a serious drinking problem. He stopped at a traffic light, looked around, realized that he was completely lost. He got out of his car, he checked the street signs, but he had no idea where he was. He tried to remember where he had been and whom he had been with, and when he couldn't remember, he began to cry. He walked around the car to see if he had struck another car, or worse yet, if he had struck a person. He was relieved to see there was no evidence of striking another car or a person. And when the man finally figured out his location, he drove home crying all the way. He had no memory of his previous 12 hours. This was a cop with a drinking problem. And that night, he knew fear for the first time. He thought his fellow officers would arrest him for DUI or for leaving the scene of an accident, but neither happened. You would think that after all that man went through, he would stop drinking, but he didn't. It took a suicide attempt before he made the final step. And he says, I know this story well because I am that man. He was that cop with a serious drinking problem. And he says, I recently passed my 17th year of sobriety. 17 years sober. Thanks to the counseling unit of the New York City Police Department and Alcoholics Anonymous. I could not have done it without them. From a nuclear bomb victim in Nagasaki, Japan, that the U.S. mass murdered tens of thousands of people there, August 9th, 1945. This testimony in the year 2005 in New York City from one of the victims, Taniguchi Sumateru. He says, in 1945, I was 16 years old. On the morning of August 9th, I was riding my bicycle 1.8 kilometers from the epicenter of the bomb. And when it struck, I was burned on my back with the heat ray of the fireball, also with the invisible radiation. I was smashed to the ground by the blast that knocked down buildings. Children were burnt to a crisp. And remember, this is what Sandia and Los Alamos weapons labs are all about. No matter how highly educated, how kind to their next door neighbors, their daily job is designing these weapons of unspeakable torture and mass murder. There was a woman whose hearing was all gone, her face swollen to the degree she could not open her eyes. I still remember the scene as if I saw it only yesterday, and here it was 60 years later. I could not do anything for those who were suffering and desperately calling for help. I deeply regret that, even today. He says, I walked like a sleepwalker. A man carried me on his back up to the mountain. People there were saying their name and address in the hope that it would be conveyed to their family. They died one after another while asking for water. In the morning of the third day, I was rescued. I was taken to a city 27 kilometers from Nagasaki, where the hospitals were all full. So I was taken to an elementary school. And 3 days after, 6 days from the bombing, my wounds started to bleed. I started to feel the pain. For more than a month, I could receive no proper medical treatment. He went through hell. By September, I was sent to an elementary school in Nagasaki City, and for the first time, I received what can be called modern medical treatment. Doctors tried to give me a blood transfusion, But the blood wouldn't go into my blood vessels, probably because my internal organs were damaged by radiation from that nuclear bomb from the United States. And never forget, the only nation in the history of the world that has used atom bombs to mass murder tens of thousands of people in cities is the United States. And 2 of the 3 major nuclear weapons laboratories of this hell are here in New Mexico. He says, I suffered serious anemia. The burnt flesh started to rot. And generally, those who suffered burns or injuries were infested with maggots, tiny worms that got into their bodies from the wounds and ate their flesh. But for me, this did not happen until 1 year later. I could not stir an inch. I helplessly lay on my belly, crying out for a merciful death. He wanted to die. Because I could not move, my chest suffered severe bed sores, even to the bones. Here he was, 16 years old. It took 1 year and 9 months before I was finally able to move. And after 3 years and 7 months, I left the hospital. I went in and out of the hospital many times until 1960, 15 years after he was bombed. Around 1982, tumors started to appear on the scars on my back, and they had to be taken out. And after that, a rock-hard tumor formed on my chest. It comes back every time it is taken out. He says half a century has passed since so-called peace was restored. As I look at our society today, I fear that forgotten memories are leading to renewed affirmation of the atomic bombs. People are forgetting, or people didn't really know in the first place, the hell of atomic bombs. He says, I'm not a guinea pig, nor am I on exhibition, but those of you who happen to be here, and this was in New York City in 2005, when he came to testify before the United Nations. Please don't turn your eyes away from me. I want to believe in the strength and warmth in your eyes. Nuclear weapons and humans cannot exist together. No one should be made to suffer the pain we have gone through. He's speaking about the survivors of the U.S. atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tens of thousands of people. I sincerely hope for all of humanity to live a rich and peaceful life. And to that end, I call on you to join our best efforts to build a world with no nuclear weapons. I, Don Schrader, refuse to pay federal income tax for nuclear bombs and for U.S. wars, past, present, and future. Almost half of federal income tax goes for mass murder. I have paid not one damn bloody penny of federal income tax for 42 years. And then a woman writes, and she is polyamorous, as I am. And that means that she openly enjoys sex and romance with more than one person. This woman says, I've been poly all my life, since well before I knew there was such a thing. As far back as grade school, I've generally had a crush on more than one boy or guy or man. And as an adult, I cannot imagine a life where I'm limited to one man, even though I love my husband deeply. When I was with someone before I knew about polyamory, before she knew about the fact that there are a lot of people who can be deeply, openly in love and enjoy sex with several people in their life at the same time. When I was with someone before I knew about polyamory, I would cheat. I wouldn't want to, but sooner or later I'd meet someone else and fall in love so hard that I had to be with the other person too. I hated cheating. I hated dishonesty. I hated myself. Reading Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy's book, The Ethical Slut, changed my life. I finally understood the person I had been my whole life. I'm poly. I'm not monogamous. I can't choose to be monogamous. I will always have the capacity to love more than one person and not have the capacity to keep myself from falling in love with others. It's a choice whether I act on that capacity, but it's not a choice whether I fall in love with more than one person at a time. Some people might just flirt with the lifestyle, but some of us are built to love more than one person at a time. The testimony of one honest woman. And the testimony of another honest, polyamorous woman. She says, I'm bisexual, polyamorous 24-year-old woman. From the very first time I was faced with a cute boy who wanted to date me, I knew that I could not be in a closed, exclusive relationship. I knew it as instinctively as I knew that I found women attractive as well as men. I'd never heard of open relationships or polyamory. I was a virgin, so it wasn't about sex. I didn't have anyone else on the horizon. I really liked this boy, so it wasn't about keeping my options open. And yet I knew that I could not agree to be his girlfriend without the freedom to date, to flirt, to sleep with, and to love other people. And see, that's how I feel as a gay man. And she, a bisexual woman, both of us polyamorous. 6 years later, she says, I started dating someone I think might turn out to be the love of my life. He's a match for me intellectually, sexually, emotionally. We make each other so happy. It's silly. Even so, even in the best relationship I can possibly imagine, I know monogamy is not for me. Incredibly, he feels the same way. I think most people fall somewhere in the middle with probably more oriented toward monogamy, having just one partner at a time in one's life, than not. But poly people like me exist. The strong, honest testimony of a bisexual, polyamorous woman. Do we wonder why millions worldwide hate and fear this U.S. government? Some heart-wrenching stories of families whose lives were ripped apart during the U.S. war on Afghanistan. Fardin, a 6-year-old boy from Kabul, was sound asleep next to his brothers and sisters when a terrifying U.S. bomb came barreling down from the sky, destroying his home and 5 others, and leaving 15 people dead. Though Fardin survived, he became like a baby. He stopped walking, 6 years old. He must be carried all day, horrifically traumatized. He stopped talking except for high-pitched shrieks. He doesn't sleep through the night. He wets his bed. This, of course, took place years ago during the U.S. war on Afghanistan. His family, too poor to take him to a doctor. Besides, there were only 8 psychiatrists at that time in this traumatized nation of over 20 million people. Ozzy Zola was a healthy 20-year-old who worked with his father as a house painter there in Afghanistan. He was trying to save money so he could get married and have a family. But that dream was dashed when a U.S. bomb aimed at the Kabul airport instead hit his home 1 kilometer away. The debris that penetrated his left leg left him in excruciating pain. Not having decent medical care, his leg became infected and it was chopped off above the knee. Ozzy Zola had no money to get a prosthetic leg or a wheelchair. His family ended up borrowing money from friends and relatives to rebuild their home, but they went deep in debt. Ulia Kuduz had always depended on the income of her husband, Abdul, to feed their 6 children. Abdul worked as a guard at a marble pit until a U.S. bomb aimed at a Taliban garrison near the mine hit him. Left with 6 small children and no income, this woman cried and cried. She was ashamed of sending her children out to beg for food. She pleaded for help to keep her children from starving. If we have a conscience, how can we pay 1 penny for these atrocities against other human beings who might have been our close friends if we had grown up on the same street? The smoke of 1 cigarette contains 4,700 different chemical compounds. 43 of those 4,700 chemical compounds are proven cancer causers. Deadly chemicals in cigarettes include nicotine, a poison so powerful it's outlawed as a bug killer. It's physiologically, psychologically addicting, nicotine. Cigarettes contain carbon monoxide, the compound in car exhaust that kills by reducing the amount of oxygen in our blood. Cigarettes have tar, a sticky brown residue that stains fingers and teeth. Contains benzopyrene, one of the deadliest cancer causers known. Cigarettes also have acetone, ammonia, arsenic, ethanol, formaldehyde, methane, vinyl chloride. Tobacco farms are not required by law to tell the whole story of what's in their cigarettes. There's no such thing as a safe cigarette. All tobacco, whether processed commercially or grown in your own backyard, contains nicotine and tar. And if not sprayed, native tobacco lacks the insecticides, the fertilizers, and other additives found in commercial tobacco. But native tobacco is still addicting, and it still can kill you if you smoke it regularly. Jimmy Carter said, "My father, my mother, both sisters, my brother." Now get this, Jimmy Carter, my father, my mother, both sisters, and my brother all died of cancer, and all smoked cigarettes. Al Gore spoke of watching his sister Nancy die of lung cancer. And neighbors of the Gores said that the family stopped growing tobacco on their farm after Nancy's death from lung cancer. Smoking causes wrinkles, male impotency, not being able to get a firm erection, damage to the immune system. How criminally hypocritical for cigarette companies to use sex appeal to advertise their poison. Cigarettes gradually deteriorate male erections and orgasm and escalate the risk of AIDS for those who already have the virus. As ferociously addicting as heroin and cocaine, cigarettes kill far more people in this country than all hard drugs combined. Tobacco is the most heavily sprayed U.S. crop for human consumption. So a smoker plays Russian roulette not only with tobacco's tars and nicotine, but also with the highly poisonous bug killers and a host of other chemical additives in commercial cigarettes. My friend Seth Hoffman wrote and performed the song "Live Every Day," the song that I open and close my program with. "Live Every Day" is one of my all-time favorite songs. And to hear his song anytime, go to YouTube, and on YouTube to Seth Hoffman, Hoffmann, "Live Every Day." Deep meaning, beautiful melody. And I told Seth years ago that when I die, if he's around, I want him to sing Live Every Day at my funeral. Seth used to live here in Albuquerque. He was a school teacher here, a great singer in English, in Spanish, and Yiddish. He now lives in India with his wife and their young son. Many thanks, Seth, for your wonderful song and for allowing me to use it on my program. And here are the words. Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past, and life just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know. And one day, we'll all be gone. Taste the wind. Don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love. Let the music get you high. And when it's said and done, you know the sun will shine on. Learn all you can from the folks you meet, though they might be strange and sleep on the street. But in some ways, we all are wise. Give all your thoughts a fighting chance. Ask your fears and doubts. Would you like to dance? And open up your eyes. See the world. Let the world see you. Take the time to love the things you do. And you'll hear it when your spirit starts to rise. Coretta Scott King, the wife and widow of Martin Luther King Jr., in 1998 said, as an African American woman, I'm concerned about discrimination against my race and gender, but it's just not good enough to support human rights for one's own race or culture and then be silent about injustices to other groups. As long as that's all we do, our success will be limited and we'll be working against each other instead of with each other. She said, I've made the decision that I'm not going to put up with homophobic or anti-gay bigotry because it's morally wrong, because it lowers human rights standards for everyone. Coretta Scott King noted that some activists have sought to discourage her advocacy on gay civil rights, but she's adamant. I've always felt that anti-gay attitudes and policies were not just, not worthy of a free society and must be opposed by all Americans who believe in democracy. Coretta Scott King said, therefore, I appeal to everyone who believes in Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream to make room at the table of brother and sisterhood for lesbian and gay people. Gays and lesbians stood up for civil rights in Montgomery, Selma, in Albany, Georgia, and St. Augustine, Florida, and many other campaigns of the civil rights movement. And many of these courageous men and women were fighting for my freedom at a time when they could find few voices for their own. And I salute their contributions. Good night.
Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past and life's just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if